Welcome back for Chapter 7 and 8 of Anne of Green Gables. Chapter 7. Autumn came to Green Gables, all red and gold, with a delightful spiciness in the air and the music of birdsong in the trees. There were tufts of scarlet berries and crisp leaves in the hollows, and it was time for Anne to go to school. Anne liked Avonlea School, with its old-fashioned desks and the brook outside where the children put their bottles of milk to keep them cool. She liked the lessons, even if the teacher, Mr. Phillips, did say that her spelling was disgraceful. And she liked the other children, except, that is, for Gilbert Blythe. Gilbert was a tall boy with curly brown hair and mischievous hazel eyes. One morning he noticed Anne staring dreamily out of the window. Grinning, he reached over, pulled the end of her braid, and said in a loud whisper, "Carrots! Carrots!" Anne sprang to her feet, her eyes flashing. "You mean, hateful boy! How dare you!" And then thwack! Anne brought her slate down on Gilbert's head. The whole classroom said, "Oh!" in horrified delight, and Mr. Phillips strode forward. "Anne Shirley, what does this mean?" Anne said nothing. She refused to say in front of everyone that Gilbert had called her carrots. But Gilbert spoke up. "It was my fault, sir. I teased her." Mr. Phillips ignored him. He told Anne to stand before the blackboard, and above her head he wrote, "Anne Shirley has a very bad temper. Anne Shirley must learn to control her temper." Anne stood there for the rest of the afternoon. She did not cry or hang her head. She was much too angry for that. When school was over, Anne marched outside to find Gilbert waiting for her. "I'm awfully sorry I made fun of your hair, Anne. Don't be mad." But Anne swept by as if she hadn't heard. "I shall never forgive Gilbert Blythe," she told Diana as they walked home together. "He has hurt my feelings excruciatingly." It is possible the matter might have blown over quickly had it not been for what happened the next day. Some of the boys came running in late from recess, and Anne came in with them, having lost track of time while picking wildflowers. Mr. Phillips frowned at them all, but Anne was the one he singled out to punish. "Since you seem so fond of the boys' company, you can go and sit with Gilbert Blythe." Anne had no choice. She went to sit beside Gilbert, burying her face in her arms. Everyone whispered and giggled, but Anne never lifted her head, not even when Gilbert slid a little candy heart across the desk toward her. Instead, she dropped it to the floor and ground it to powder beneath her heel. When school ended, Anne marched out without looking at him. From that day on, whenever she met Gilbert on the road, she passed him by with an icy contempt. Anne made up her mind that she would hate Gilbert Blythe forever. Chapter 8. Anne was rather solemn after the fuss in school, but her spirits were never low for long, and by Saturday she was skipping into Green Gables' kitchen, her arms full of red and golden maple leaves. "Oh, Marilla," exclaimed Anne, "I'm so glad I live in a world where there are Octobers." Anne was feeling especially joyful this morning because Marilla was going to town for the day, and Anne had been allowed to invite Diana to tea to keep her company. "It will be perfectly lovely," she said. "May I use the rosebud tea set?" "No, indeed. You can use the old one," said Marilla. "But you can have fruitcake and cookies and a little yellow crock of cherry preserves, and there's a bottle of raspberry cordial in the cupboard." Soon after Marilla had left, Diana arrived. Rather than running into the kitchen as usual, she knocked primly at the front door, and the two girls shook hands as if they had never met. "Won't you sit down and have something to drink?" asked Anne, leading Diana into the sitting room. It was not yet tea time, but she wanted to be a good hostess, so she went to fetch the raspberry cordial. Eventually, she found the bottle at the back of the cupboard. "Please, help yourself, Diana," she said politely. Diana poured a glass and sipped it daintily. "It's awfully nice," she said. "Do take as much as you want," said Anne. "I'm just going to stir the fire up. There are so many responsibilities when you're keeping house." Diana drank first one, then two, then three whole glasses. When Anne came back from the kitchen, Diana said she didn't know raspberry cordial could taste so nice. "Well, Marilla is a famous cook," said Anne. "She's trying to teach me to cook, too, but I assure you, Diana, it's an uphill struggle." Anne was about to tell the story of the disastrous layer cake she made when Diana suddenly stood up, putting her hands to her head. "I'm awfully sick," she said unsteadily. "I must go home." "But you mustn't go without your tea," cried Anne. "Lie down on the sofa, and I'll fetch some cake." "I can't. I'm awfully dizzy," groaned Diana. "Oh, Diana, do you suppose you're taking the smallpox? If you are, I'll never forsake you," gasped Anne. But Diana was already stumbling toward home. The next day, Marilla was in the kitchen when Anne came running in, her face streaked with tears. "Mrs. Barry says that I got Diana drunk when she came to tea," she wailed. "She says I'm a wicked girl and she's never going to let Diana play with me again." Marilla stared. "Drunk? What did you give her?" "Only raspberry cordial," sobbed Anne. Marilla opened the cupboard and saw at once what had happened. "Why, you gave Diana my homemade currant wine. Didn't you know the difference?" "I never tasted it," exclaimed Anne. "Diana drank 3 big glasses and got awfully sick. Mrs. Barry thinks I did it on purpose." "She ought to punish Diana for being greedy," said Marilla. "Don't cry, Anne. I know it seems bad, but it's a mistake, that's all." "I must cry. My heart is broken," wailed Anne. "Mrs. Barry wouldn't even let us say goodbye." "She'll change her mind when she realizes you weren't to blame," said Marilla. But Mrs. Barry did not change her mind. Diana was not allowed to talk to Anne or sit with her at school. "My kindred spirit has been torn from me," Anne said forlornly. As autumn turned to winter, Anne grew accustomed to being apart from Diana. "We meet as strangers now, but we are still kindred spirits. I love her with inextinguishable love," she told Matthew one January evening. The two of them were alone because Marilla had gone to town. It felt very cozy in the kitchen, with a bright fire in the hearth and frost shining in the window pane. Matthew was nodding off over the newspaper, and Anne was studying her geometry book. Suddenly, there came the sound of flying footsteps outside. The kitchen door banged open, and Diana came rushing in. "Oh, Anne, Minnie May is terribly sick," she gasped out. "Father and Mother are away, and there's nobody to go for the doctor. I'm so scared. You have to help me." Matthew got up without a word and slipped out into the yard. Anne knew without him saying anything that he'd gone to fetch the doctor, but that it might be hours before he returned. Diana was still sobbing, and Anne could see that she was too frightened to think straight. "Don't worry, Diana," she said, reaching for her coat. "I know what to do. Remember, Mrs. Hammond had twins 3 times, and they were always sick." The two girls went out into the yard, hand in hand. Outside the night was clear and frosty. Snow powdered the branches of the fir trees as they stumbled through deep drifts to little Minnie May. They found her lying on the kitchen sofa, looking very ill indeed. "Put some more wood on the stove," Anne told Diana. "I'll give her some medicine." All that long, anxious night, Anne and Diana worked patiently to take care of Minnie May. It wasn't until 3 o'clock in the morning that Matthew returned with the doctor, but by then Minnie May was comfortable and sleeping soundly. "I'm glad Mrs. Hammond had 3 sets of twins after all," said Anne with a yawn. "If she hadn't, I might not have known what to do." "I couldn't have done better myself," the doctor told Matthew. "That little red-headed girl is as smart as can be." Anne and Matthew went back to Green Gables through the white frosted morning. Anne went straight to bed and slept so long that it was afternoon before she woke. Downstairs in the kitchen she found Marilla waiting with some news. "Mrs. Barry was here while you were asleep. She wanted to thank you for what you did last night. She hopes you'll forgive her and be good friends with Diana again." Anne was already on her feet. Without stopping for a hat or coat, she flew out the door and through the snowy orchard to her friend's house, where Mrs. Barry and Diana welcomed her with the most elegant tea and their very best china. Ready for some more questions? Okay. Anne meets both a friend and a foe at school. Does Anne find herself getting into trouble with both Gilbert and Diana? How? Think about it, okay? Great job. How does she earn back her relationship with Diana? How does she make good with Diana again? What does she do for her and her family? Awesome job, guys.